1 in 200 people on Earth identify as transgender. In Brazil's population of 209.3 million, that makes 1,046,500 Brazilians that do not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. However, this number is beginning to decrease rapidly. But what could be wrong with Brazil? Trans rights is a problem that the globe shares. Plus, they have the largest gay pride parade in the world, and they even legalized the changing of gender markers on official documents for transgender individuals. They have all of the LGBT laws that the United States do, so what makes Brazil so special? Oh, isn't anybody going to do something about that? Well, yes. The problem is that nobody in the world knows what's really going on underneath the cloak of false liberalism. Brazil was under a military dictatorship until 1985, and since its fall into democracy, Brazilian congressmen have pushed forward a variety of pro-LGBT legislation, including signing several United Nations documents dedicating countries to fighting for their LGBT citizens. Despite these public displays of progressivism, these laws have quickly become zombie policies in Brazil. That is, they look good on their resume, but are not actually being enforced. Take transgender healthcare, for example. The Brazilian Unified Health System has supported the use of gender-affirming treatments for transgender individuals since 1997. However, according to a 2016 study by the Journal of Immigrant and Minority Health, 39.2% of trans women and 55.4% of trans men in Brazil cannot find a doctor to prescribe them their respective hormone treatments. 60.9% of trans women, 65.4% of trans men, and 57.1% of gender diverse individuals have experienced some form of discrimination in the medical field. As a transgender interviewer stated,
"You go out and listen to people whispering, criticizing, laughing. You may need a doctor tomorrow, but a fatal disease might be better than ridicule and visitation."
Luckily, there is a network of international and domestic non-governmental organizations who recognize how deadly Brazil's policies are for its transgender citizens and are dedicated to improving those lives, although they have not been as successful as they can be. Looking first on an international scale, the leading NGO advocating for transgender individuals is Transgender Europe. Their main campaign, Trans Respect versus Transphobia, was launched in 2005 as a research project to see how transgender lives are affected in countries around the world. Along with their research, TGEU's website includes a link to a map of the globe, where users can scroll over any particular country, see the number of transgender homicides from 2008 to 2016, and click to learn about what policies are supposedly in place to protect transgender lives. These include access to healthcare, legal protections against discrimination, social situations, and more. Transnationally, TGEU remains the frontrunner for policy changes with the United Nations. Their associates, on the other hand, handle other aspects of the network. The International Trans Fund hosts global fundraisers to end discrimination, and grants donations to small domestic NGOs combating local issues. Likewise, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation handles transgender advocacy through social media, exposing homophobic politicians worldwide. In a recent report on their website, GLAAD focuses on Brazil's openly homophobic President Jair Bolsonaro, using quotes from his interviews such as,
"I would rather have a son who is an addict than a son who is gay,"
and
"I would not rape you, you are not worthy of it,"
said to a fellow congresswoman. On a domestic scale, Brazil's leading transgender NGO is the National Association of Transvestites and Transsexuals, or ANTRA. ANTRA uses a similar tactic to TGEU. Their website includes a map for every year since 2017, outlining transgender homicides in Brazil. Some victims listed are never identified, while clicking on other names brings you to a profile of their murder. This includes pictures of the crime scene, the date it was committed, the age of the victim, and the method that took each innocent life. In this case, 19-year-old Aisla Silva was beaten to death on January 26, 2019. Local associates of ANTRA include the Trans Educational Institute of Brazil and Trans Empregos, who focus on combating discrimination in education and employment, respectively. The actors within this global network must work together in order to be successful. The domestic organizations collect personal data and statistics that normally cannot be reached by distant outside associates. Similarly, the international organizations can reach a global population, providing connections to local advocate groups that they otherwise would never be able to create. The Transgender and Gender Diverse network has a variety of strategies in its repertoire to effect change in Brazil. This includes information politics, lobbying, digital advocacy, accountability politics, fundraising, and symbolic politics. But there is so much more they can do in order to ensure a safer life for transgender people in Brazil. The current TGD network must realize who their main enemy is: conservative right-wing evangelicals. Brazil has been historically Christian, with the evangelical front slowly growing over the past decade. Although Brazil is a secular country, the separation between church and state is nearly non-existent today because the evangelical parliamentary front has encouraged the majority of Brazilian voters to elect religious icons into positions of political power. President Jair Bolsonaro was able to win the last election without any TV or radio advertisements because the evangelical front wanted him to, not because the majority of Christian Brazilians are unempathetic to the slaughter of their fellow citizens. The front is in a powerful political position because they are able to use public fear to their advantage, spreading unsupported fake facts like homosexuality leads to pedophilia and TGD destroy the good Christian family. In order to counter this strong religious force in Brazilian government, the TGD network must do two things. 1. Expose Brazilian policy on a transnational level. The countries that Brazil has aligned with on transgender rights acts under the United Nations need to know that Brazilian politicians have not followed through on their international promises. This will significantly increase foreign pressure on Brazil's government to enforce progressive policies. And 2. Target the moral majority. It is certain that no amount of advocacy is going to change the hearts of Brazil's current political body. To ensure a better government for transgender people, domestic NGOs must aim to educate the average voting Brazilian. It is human to empathize with another's struggle, and ANTRA has already collected a plethora of terribly sad statistics and personal stories of TGD realities. It is imperative that this network express to evangelical citizens that somebody's innocent daughter, son, sister, or brother will be murdered for their identity alone. After all, thou shalt not kill. These two suggestions for improvement are necessary to effect progressive change under the most conservative government Brazil has had since the end of its dictatorship. Holding the government accountable for its effective legislation, putting Brazilian TGD rights on the agendas of international meetings, and spreading factual accounts of TGD discrimination to the evangelical public are a few of the only ways that TGD NGOs will regain influence over Brazilian policy. This is the only way to ensure a safer life for transgender individuals in Brazil and put an end to this travesty.